This debate will go down in the history books. Religion has been a subject of debate for over centuries now, which typically revolves around its origins, validity, and relevance in modern society. When Jordan Peterson had Stephen Fry on his show, he brought up previous comments made by Fry about God being an utter maniac because of the evil presence in the world. The pair kept going back and forth, with each laying his point of view and brilliantly commenting on the arguments of the other. But before I delve deeper into it, watch the clip.
Okay, I'm going to read something, and forgive me, but
No.
I want to go here. You're face to face with God. Bone cancer in children. What's that about? How dare you? How dare you create a world where there is such misery? That's not our fault. It's utterly, utterly evil. Why should I respect a capricious, mean-minded, stupid God who creates a world so full of injustice and pain? And then one more. Because the God who created this universe, if it was created by God, is quite clearly a maniac, utter maniac. Ivan in The Brothers Karamazov.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Right. Now it's in, okay. So
Yes,
what happens in The Brothers Karamazov is that Ivan wins the argument.
Yeah.
But Eloshia is the better person.
Completely so. And we love him.
So it's,
yeah. It's a book
so
everyone
it's very
should
interesting.
read. I would urge everyone to read The Brothers Karamazov, because I do think it's a work of genius. There's a lot about Dostoevsky I really dislike because of his influences. Again, people who don't understand Dostoevsky think he's a champion of right-wing religiosity, without understanding that he went through an extraordinary life experience to come to where he did come, and that his novels show his full understanding of all kinds of different points of view. But in terms of the dialectic of that issue about how there can be a God, I mean, I was answering a question that I was asked.
I know, and I'm not trying. I'm not really not trying to put you on the spot.
My point is, I don't believe there is such a being. But if there were, and he were the kind of being that has been worshipped and described by various religions around the world, monotheistic religions, then I would have many bones to pick with him. But of course, I don't believe there is such a thing. But the argument from evil, as it's known, is a very old one, and it goes back through medieval religious figures as well as later humanists. That this idea that it is very hard to square this loving God who has knowledge of every hair on our head and adores us and adores little kittens, but he also, as I say, bone cancer in children, but also life cycles of insects whose whole aim is to burrow into the eyes of children in Africa and lay their eggs there and cause blindness for those children. I mean, you could quite easily picture a universe in which there weren't such an animal, and in which children were not sent blind with pain and horror by the various bugs and fungi and insects and viruses in the world. It isn't necessary.
There's a worm in Africa that burrows under the skin, and it's a long worm. And if you can pull it out with a pencil and wrap it, but it breaks, it's fragile, and then it gets infected. It's a terrible thing. And a doctor recently made it his life's work to eradicate that and did it successfully.
By the way, subscribe for more discussions just like this. Fry's argument, often referred to as the problem of evil, is not a novel one and has been a central topic in religious philosophy for centuries. However, this reasoning is overly simplistic and fails to account for the complexity of the human condition. One of the most widely cited defenses against this problem is the existence of free will. It argues that God granted humans free will, and with this gift comes the possibility of choosing evil. The ability to make choices is essential to the human experience and personal growth. If God were to intervene every time someone were about to commit an evil act, human freedom would not be existent. Therefore, the existence of free will necessitates the possibility of evil. In this view, evil is not a creation of God, but a consequence of human autonomy. Another argument is that suffering and evil are necessary components of the world in which moral and spiritual growth is possible. Challenges and adversities often lead to strength, perseverance, compassion, and other virtues. In many religions, earthly life is seen as testing ground or a place of spiritual development, where individuals are given the opportunity to grow towards goodness through their responses to suffering and evil. Additionally, different religions provide various explanations for the existence of evil, each adding to the understanding of God's role in the face of suffering. So, for instance, in some Eastern religions, the concept of karma provides a framework in which evil and suffering are understood as consequences of one's actions, suggesting a self-regulating moral balance within the universe.
I read what you wrote, and I take it very seriously, and I wasn't throwing it in your face.
No.
I brought it up actually because of what you said about Flaubert's attitude, because what that lacks, what your statement lacks, is exactly what Flaubert highlighted in that woman on her knees. And I'm not saying this is a simple solution, right? And I would say, so let's take the argument you made there, and there's a direction that goes in that's nihilistic and resentful and vengeful and angry and all understandable.
Yes.
But to me, it doesn't look to me like there's anything good in it. It looks like it's entirely counterproductive. It makes the problem it purports to have been generated by worse.
Mm-hmm.
So then the question is, what's the appropriate attitude, given that the argument you make is actually an extraordinarily powerful argument? And I don't know the answer to that, but I do know, I think, that resentment and anger, and even the motive that would make you want to say that to God himself, I think that's probably not helpful, even though it's so, well, I came to that with great difficulty. I mean, I've had my reasons to be resentful and angry, especially recently, and because I'm suffering a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And it makes me resentful and angry and wanting to shake my fist.
Yeah.
But I found upon intense consideration that there was nothing in that didn't make it worse, and that therefore that must be wrong. Even though it's justifiable, right?
Jordan, I completely understand. And you must remember that my response was to a question I didn't see coming, and it was amused. It was because I don't believe in this God. It's not an issue. I'm not really resentful and angry about the fact that there's evil in the world. I'm sorrowful very often, and I'm united in my admiration for the fact and the real belief I have that most people, fundamentally, given this dysfunction or this deep trauma, most people are so good, are so anxious to be good, are deontically good, have a sense of obligation and drive in them to be better than they are. I think that's one of the key things that I love about humanity, is not just that we are dissatisfied with things that are wrong and can be improved, but that with ourselves we are dissatisfied, and that most of us want to be better. I know that's true of me all the time. Every time I go off to sleep, I think, how did I screw up today? How can I be better tomorrow? Why am I so bad at this? If only I could manage that. In moral terms, genuine moral terms.
I think that's an extraordinarily common experience, and very much under-noticed.
Yeah.
And part of the reason, as far as I can tell, that the talks that I've been giving, let's say, have had the effect that they've had, is because I do point out that that's an extraordinarily common experience.
Yeah.
That self-torture by conscience, and it does indicate this striving towards a higher mode of being.
That touches on one of the most intriguing and thought-provoking aspects of this whole argument, the question of the origins of our moral compass. Central to the debate is the divine command theory, which proposes that moral values are prescribed by God. That is, good actions are good because God commands them, and evil actions are evil because God forbids them. This theory suggests that without God, humanity would lack a clear understanding of morality, and all moral judgments would be subjective, which are based purely on personal preferences or societal consensus that could change over time and vary between cultures. However, this stance faces significant philosophical challenges. Critics argue that if morals are merely divine commands, then God could decree any action regardless of how heinous it seems to us, as morally good. This leads to the Euthyphro dilemma first posed by Plato, where he notes, and I quote, "Is something morally good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is morally good? If the former is true, morality is arbitrary. If the latter, then good must exist independently of God, and thus knowing good from evil does not require necessarily God's existence." Evolutionists also argue against the divine command theory, who believe that morals could be viewed as adaptive behaviors that have evolved to promote social cooperation and enhance the survival and reproduction of our species. Behaviors that we now term moral likely provided evolutionary advantages, helping early human societies to flourish by fostering cooperation, reducing intra-group conflict, and building social bonds. Over millennia, these behaviors became codified into the moral codes and legal systems we recognize today. This perspective aligns with that of sociologists as well, who argue that moral codes evolve out of necessity as societies create and enforce rules that promote harmony and reduce conflicts within the group.
The other question I have when I look at the response that I just read is that the amount of the world's evil that's a consequence of our voluntary moral insufficiencies is indeterminate. So you might say, hypothetically speaking, that as part of God's creation, we actually have important work to do. And if we shirk it, the consequences are real. Yeah. And you might say, well, that's just an apology for God. And perhaps that's the case. And perhaps there's no God at all. And so what the hell are we talking about? But I do think it's an important issue. I mean, your life is characterized by a stellar level of constant productive creativity. That's you, and you're offering that to the world, and that seems necessary. And maybe it's because the problems are real and important, and the role we have to play ethically is of paramount importance, truly.
Yeah.
Why else would we torture ourselves with conscience? And I would say that's the flowering of the religious instinct within you.
Well, you could describe it as that, but then, there are phrases. I mean, you used a phrase earlier that I wanted to say, whoa, hang on, I'm not sure I know what that means, a higher mode of existence. I don't see... I remember having this argument with John Cleese, of all people, some years ago. He was a great lover of the Tibetan Book of the Dead and Gilbran and people like that. And I've always found them slightly hard to take. And he talked about I think the phrase he used was a higher level of consciousness. And I said, I don't, and again, this is my empiricist thing. It sounds cynical and skeptical. It's not meant to be, but what level? Describe a level. What is a higher mode? Why higher? What's higher than another? Are you saying it in terms of animals? It's a view, it's an old-fashioned Huxleyan view of evolution that most modern, Richard Dawkins, for example, most modern evolutionary scientists and so on, the ethologists would deprecate, to say that there is a higher level of being, a higher mode of consciousness. Is it just like saying, well, you're better educated, you've read more, you know more? Is it you've somehow been enlightened, a Verklärungseffect, as the Germans would say, which is not necessarily intellectual, but is somehow spiritual? And if so, show me an example of it. Show me someone who has a higher mode of existence than I do.
Although I appreciate the delicate explanation from Fry, the argument that all realities must be verifiable by empirical evidence to prove its existence couldn't be counted on to disprove the existence of God. This perspective is limited because it confines understanding to what human tools and technologies can measure or observe at any given time. History has shown us that many phenomena initially thought to be inexplicable or even non-existent were later proven real by measurement techniques and scientific knowledge advanced. For example, microscopic organisms were unknown to science until the invention of the microscope. In the context of divinity, just because current empirical methods cannot verify the existence of a higher being does not rule out any existence. Additionally, the assumption that human beings can currently detect all forms of existence is arguably arrogant. The universe is vast and complex, and human understanding and perception is limited. It is possible that the existence of higher dimensions or beings could be beyond our current capacity to comprehend or measure. For example, the string theory suggests that beyond the 3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension with which we are familiar, there could be additional dimensions, up to 10 or more, that are compacted into scales so small that they are currently undetectable with existing technology. These dimensions, although not perceivable, contribute fundamentally to the fabric of our universe. If the universe can encompass such extraordinary hidden complexities, it is not unreasonable to consider that it might also host forms of existence such as higher beings or dimensions, which are beyond our current scientific understanding. I think that whether you're a religious or an atheist person, we can't ignore how this debate is proof that we can still have our civilized discussions in our modern societies without resorting to name-calling or claiming to be offended because the other side has differing views. More people, especially those on the left, should take notes from these two men and understand that people from vastly different belief systems can exchange ideas and perspectives in a manner that not only enhances understanding but promotes a broader tolerance for diversity of thought.